You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
All right, welcome in to another edition of 3 Ma. I am John Kurtz. I do not have Cole and DY today. I guess it's 1 Ma in a way, but very happy to be joined by Curry Sexton, former K-State wide receiver, and now not maybe in charge, but a part of Wildcat NIL. I don't know, Curry, you can tell us, are you in charge of Wildcat NIL? What is the appropriate way to introduce you with your title there with Wildcat NIL?
I have no idea what my technical title would be. We all lead the group by committee, so we don't have really designated roles, although we all do have different strong suits than one another. So I think it's fair to say just a part of Wildcat NIL.
Okay, perfect. Well, Curry is here to give us a little bit of education on NIL, what's going on in that NIL space, and how you can help K-State, because it is a critical time in college athletics. It is a critical time if you want to be competitive, to understand what's going on in the NIL space and make sure that you have your ducks in a row as a school and that you are getting as much support as possible there, because that, like it or not, is the name of the game. We all love having a basketball program that finished in the top 10, a football program that finished in the top 15 this year. If we want to keep it going, this is a very important topic to get educated on. So really looking forward to this conversation. First, I do want to remind you, the show, as always, brought to you by our friends at Holiday Distillery. Great K-State folks. Make sure that you're out there getting your Ben Holiday bottle and Bond bourbon. If you are a bourbon guy or gal, if you are more along the vodka lines, you can check out their 360 vodka as well. Both great selections. Maybe get them before some Backcat tailgates, as that's what we have now as we wait to the long doldrums of summer to football season. But again, Holiday Distillery, Ben Holiday bottle and Bond bourbon, and 360 vodka, great supporters here of the pod. Okay, so Curry, excited to get into this. Why don't you just start? I was even having to ask you some of this, kind of the background of where things are at in the NIL space for K-State, because we'd seen at one point there were a couple of different collectives. You're now with Wildcat NIL. Just give us kind of the backdrop, the background on what it is that you guys are doing and what the NIL space at K-State looks like right now.
Of course, and I appreciate you having me on, John. As we discussed before we kicked the show off, we always relish opportunities to provide some level of education on what we're doing, to maybe ease the minds of some folks who are more hesitant with respect to NIL and ensure them that we are doing things the right way. And so, like you said, I'm a part of Wildcat NIL, and Wildcat NIL is the preferred NIL collective at Kansas State University. We're a group of mainly former athletes who are now trying to source NIL opportunities for current student athletes at K-State. And so how do we do that? Well, under our umbrella, we have two different entities. So we operate a for-profit entity, and then we operate a nonprofit 501c3. And through the for-profit entity, we're sourcing your typical endorsement type activities. So as an example of that, we recently did a deal with Charlie Hustle, Kansas City-based apparel company, where they made T-shirts with Marquise and Keontae's with their image on them, with their likeness on them, and so that's an example of a deal that we facilitated on that for-profit side. The nonprofit side is something that is becoming more and more common in the NIL space, but 6 months ago, we were one of 15 or 20 NIL groups in the country with the 501c3. Through that side, we basically tried to raise and pool as much money as possible for the benefit of the student athletes. That is sort of the name of the game in NIL right now. And so that's just a quick summary of what we do at Wildcat NIL. As I mentioned, we are the preferred NIL collective of K-State athletics, and what that means is we have an official partnership with Learfield, and also have a more informal partnership with K-State athletics. To give everyone a little background on how we got to where we are now, about 1 year ago, almost exactly 1 year ago, Aaron Lockett and I started a separate NIL group called Wildcats Den. At the same time, almost the exact same time, Ryan Hennington, Jesse Ertz, Pearson McAtee, some other former athletes started Wildcat NIL. For the first 6 months of both entities operating in the space, we heard from a lot of fans, donors, athletic department folks that having two groups was confusing. And that was something that we had perceived as well. And so come September, come football season, the Wildcat NIL guys approached Aaron and I about merging the two groups. This was becoming a common theme across the country where schools had multiple collectives. They were trying to consolidate into one. And so we had some really extensive discussions about that, and got really far down the road toward a merger. And ultimately, I think everybody thought we were going to merge. In fact, we all started telling people that we were going to merge. Ultimately, Aaron decided not to make the transition for various reasons. I did, however, decide to join forces with the Wildcat NIL guys. I was a huge fan of what they were doing, what their approach to NIL was, and I'll give you just a couple examples. But one was the 501c piece. That was something that we didn't have at Wildcats Den, and so the ability to go out and raise money with that carrot of tax deductibility is a huge piece. And then the other thing is, Wildcat NIL is proportionately or comparatively takes one of the lowest fees for NIL groups across the country. And so what that means is more value for the student athletes at K-State. And so for those reasons and other reasons, I ultimately did make the transition to Wildcat NIL. And we've been really getting after it for the last 6 or 8 months. And by and large have really been the only NIL group active in the space at K-State.
So one thing that is interesting, one of the first questions that comes to mind, like right now we're in the throes of like the basketball transfer portal, right? And so I start thinking about, K-State's being mentioned with some of the top guards in the portal, and you can imagine with all the publicity from the tournament run and Marquise Noel, like they're going to be in the game for a lot of these guys, but obviously a lot of that comes down to NIL and what can you provide some of these guys in that realm. So I tend to think of NIL like almost more in the recruiting space, but you're right. We also are all well aware of the t-shirts that we saw, the King of the Little Apple t-shirts that were out there for Marquise. What is the difference between, how this works for an incoming recruit versus a player that's already on campus? Is it all kind of the same thing? How would you describe to everybody how it works, how it breaks down for each of those two different categories?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and one of the most common questions that we receive. And I will say that NIL in the recruiting space is very, very tricky. NCAA rules, the NCAA interim NIL policy basically prohibits two things. It prohibits pay for play, and it prohibits recruiting inducements. So an NIL collective, an institution, whomever it may be, cannot, or is not supposed to, go out and promise a prospective student athlete or a transfer, if you come to K-State, you will receive X amount of NIL money. That is by the book is illegal. Now, as everybody knows, everybody's doing it. Everybody's active in that space. Again, it's a very tricky space to navigate, because I think any coach would tell you right now that the number one question that they're receiving from a lot of prospective student athletes is, what can you do for me from an NIL perspective? And so we have to be, or our group is not really active in that space. It is, again, I'll just keep using the word tricky because I don't know how to better characterize it. And so from our perspective, the way that we enhance our recruiting efforts is to take care of the people who are on campus, to take care of the people who have stepped foot on campus and who have committed to K-State and who have furthered some of our success. We think then that not only will that promote roster retention, but the coaches will be able to go out and explain what their current athletes, what kind of success they've had in the NIL space, which will tell recruits that if you come to K-State, we have legitimate NIL opportunities. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a smaller group of K-State supporters who are active in that space, because there is, but that's not something that we have elected to dive off into. And the reason for that is, again, NCAA rule, but also the NCAA issued its first NIL related sanctions here a couple of months ago, and it was specifically related to the recruiting inducement piece. Surprise, surprise, it was at the University of Miami, and it related to their big booster, John Ruiz. Unfortunately, it didn't relate to the Nigel Pack situation, but it related to a similar one. Haley and Hannah Cavender, two high-profile women's basketball transfers last offseason, They were seriously considering Miami. Miami sets them up with John Ruiz for a booster recruiting dinner, and they get down the road. They have NIL discussions. They ultimately transfer to Miami. Well, this all shakes out. Haley and Hannah Cavender don't experience. They're not on the receiving end of any of the sanctions. John Ruiz doesn't receive anything as far as sanctions. The school was the only entity involved in that whole ordeal who received any sort of sanction, and it included coaching suspension, fines, scholarship restrictions, official visit restrictions, etc. And so, when I say it's tricky, that's an example of why it's tricky, because if we're out acting outside the bounds of applicable laws and guidelines in the NIL space, it may not impact us. It may not impact the athletes, but it very well may impact Kansas State athletics, which is what we're absolutely trying to avoid. And so that's a long-winded answer of saying our group is not active in the NIL recruiting space. We want to take care of our current athletes, which we think will boost our recruiting efforts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, take care of your own, the people that are there right now, and that will pay dividends in recruiting because you can use those examples. Then when you're going to recruit, what would you say the general response has been from K-State donors, people who are in a position to support this way so far?
That's a great question. The response, it varies. It really does. I think there's a contingent of K-State supporters who very much understand NIL and understand that it's sort of the new frontier of college athletics and that we have to be strong in the space. And then there may be your more old school, more conservative folks who relish the old days of amateurism and student athletes playing for the love of the game and for the full ride scholarship, who are very hesitant about NIL, if not opposed to NIL very generally. And so that's been a big piece of what we're trying to do, is trying to, as I mentioned before we hopped on this Zoom, is to bridge the gap between those who are bridge the gap of those who are opposed or very hesitant to those who are very supportive of it, because we understand that NIL is the new college, is the new athletic facilities. It's the new weight room that has sold recruits for the last 20 or 25 years. And so we have to explain to our fan base and to our big donors that this is the new fight now, and we have to make sure that we're competitive in every way.
Yeah, I like the way that you put that. That really, it has replaced the arms race in facilities, as now it's the arms race of what can you do to actually help out your student athletes that are there. And maybe to put that in further perspective, I know obviously you have connections throughout the collegiate athletics world. Like, what does that space look like right now? What does it take to be competitive? And where is K-State right now relative to its competition as we head into a new conference and a very important era here of college athletics?
Certainly. And I always preface my response to that question by saying there's a lot of embellishment that goes on as it relates to NIL. There's a lot of, hey, here's how much our group is raising. We're raising $10 million a year, and then you start to receive a little bit more information, and you realize it's half that or a third of that. And so it's hard to really sift through the nonsense, so to speak, and to really figure out what people are actually doing. Ryan Hennington from our group did go to Indianapolis a couple weeks ago when the combine was in Indy, and there was also an NIL convention there, and he was able to meet and chat with collective leaders from across the country and gain an understanding about what they're doing. The SEC schools are, and some of your more top tier schools, your Texases, your Ohio States, your USCs, they're all raising $10 million plus a year for NIL. Some of them are closer to 20 or 25 million a year for NIL. I tell people all the time, we seldom compete with those schools for a recruit. And so we don't necessarily have to compete with them as far as NIL dollars, and probably can't compete with them for NIL dollars. But what we have to do is we have to be competitive with KU, Iowa State, Texas Tech, TCU, Oklahoma State, those schools who will be a part of the Big 12 conference going forward and who we will compete with for recruits on a year-to-year basis. And so what those schools are doing, I would say varies. But I think everybody is trying to be, I think the sweet spot is somewhere in that $5 to $10 million a year range. And there's a lot of reasons for why that's the sweet spot. But we know that KU is trying to be somewhere near the $10 million range. We know that Texas Tech is already probably near that $10 million range annually. They're sort of two of the more aggressive future Big 12 schools in the NIL space. And then maybe there are some others like Iowa State who maybe haven't been as aggressive as those schools, and we probably fall more in the same category as Iowa State. And so I would say, as I told you, before we hopped on this call, there are ways in which we are competitive, and there are ways in which where we are behind. And so, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have some a small contingent of donors who are active, and maybe facilitating some of the, recruiting stuff. I don't think that's really a secret. And there are ways in which we are competitive there. But as it relates to supporting our current student athletes, I think we are behind in a lot of ways. There are, again, I'll refer to Texas Tech and KU because they are sort of the gold standard in the future Big 12 right now. They are putting entire rosters on salaries. Texas Tech has made a lot of headlines last fall for putting their entire football roster on a $25,000 a year salary, and their entire women's basketball player on a team on a similar salary. And so you start to look at the indirect recruiting piece of that, like we were just discussing. If a recruit is down to K-State K-State and Texas Tech and asks both of those coaches, what can you do for me from an NIL perspective? Texas Tech can say, well, we're going to put you on a minimum of a $25K a year scholarship. And unfortunately, right now, we can't say the same at K-State. And so that's where we have to be better. And that's where it takes buy-in from the collective fan base to make sure that, dollars big and small are supporting NIL.
Yeah, I think that I'm so glad you lay it out like that. That's what people need to hear is where K-State is at compared to, yes, the Kansas, Texas Tech, the peers of the world, legitimate peers in the Big 12. And I have a point on that I want to make about Jerome Tang and company. We'll do that after a quick break here on 3 Ball.
Whether you're a Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, KC Current, K-State, KU, or Mizzou fan, we've got you covered. Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network. Proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
And really, I suppose at this point, it even can go to Chris Kleiman too. But, when you talk about people who have some hesitancy here about NIL because they prefer how it was and used to be, just to drive home like the reality. I mean, one, you did a great job there. Like, you're going to fall behind if you don't get on board, whether you like it or not. But two, I mean, K-State is not, this is not Miami. This is not like Ole Miss. Jerome Tang made it a point. I remember at his introductory press conference last year to say, like, hey, obviously we understand the reality of NIL, but this is not going to be all about like getting guys who care about NIL being the number one thing. We're concerned with getting them like NBA contracts and real life-changing money at that level. And I thought it was just such a good way to put it. Like, we're going to help you out. Obviously, they've helped out Marquise and Keontae and guys like that we're great for them this year, but they don't want guys that are going to have that at the top of their list. So supporting NIL doesn't mean that K-State is turning into Miami and these outlaws that are going to do it like that. It's still going to be very much the culture that's been established by Chris Kleiman, by Jerome Tang. I mean, Deuce Vaughn obviously was involved in NIL. Avery Johnson has been, but we also hear about, what consummate pros they are when it comes to handling their business on a day-to-day basis. So, if you want to maintain that, like maintain these great cultures and still have the athletes that you need to compete, you do need to be taking care of them at some level. It doesn't mean that it's going to transform K-State into just the wild, wild west. And maybe I'm maybe speaking for you too much there, Curry, but that's at least the way I kind of see it here.
You're exactly right. I think one of the real benefits of our current athletic landscape at K-State is that we have incredibly strong cultures. And I think that is going to promote, recruiting success and just overall success more than anything. And so I think you're right. I don't think K-State will ever go after the kids who are only interested in chasing dollars. Because as we've seen so far, I mean, look at Texas A&M as the prime example. They chased a 2022 recruiting class with a lot of NIL money, paid them a lot of NIL money. Those kids come to campus. They have a disastrous year, go 5-7, and then a lot of those kids have already left. And they're now spending that money that they were given to spend in College Station somewhere else. And so that's an example of why you have to be strategic with your NIL approach. And so absolutely, I think we know for a fact that our coaches are not going to recruit those kids who are just chasing the dollar. And so we have to continue to have strong cultures, because ultimately I think that will attract a lot of important recruits and will lead to a lot of recruiting success. But we do have to have some level of NIL support, because again, if you're looking at, let's just easy math, if you can get $25K a year at a minimum at Texas Tech, and there's zero money at K-State, even if you're not chasing the dollars, that's a huge difference. I mean, over the course of a 4 or 5 year career, that's $100K plus in a difference. And that's not to say we'd be at zero, but that's just simple math. And so there has to be some level of NIL support to make a kid say, there's maybe better money out there. There's maybe more money at a place like Texas Tech than a place like K-State. But I want to go to K-State because they've recently competed for championships. They have a strong culture. They have an incredible fan base. They have incredible facilities. Manhattan is a great college town. So you're right. The culture is ultimately going to win the day. But despite that, we do still have to be relatively competitive in the NIL space.
So if there are those listening to this right now that are saying, okay, like I'm starting to come around, like I get this, they have some interest, like what are the steps for people that want to help and want to get involved with you guys? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways in which it can sort of go from here. And I think if you are all in and want to support, you can go to our website, www.catsnil.com, and click the donate now link and donate that way. And that could be a one-time donation, that can be a monthly donation, whatever whatever works for you and your budget. If you are mostly in but want to learn more about exactly what we're doing and how you fit in, then shoot us an email. You can email me at curry@catsnil.com, or you can reach out to our general contact line at contact@catsnil.com. And we'll be happy to have further discussions with you about where you fit. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we have the nonprofit and then we have the for-profit entity. And so we have a lot of discussions with people trying to figure out where they fit in. If you're a business owner or if you're a marketing director at a business and you guys have an interest in maybe seeing what's out there in the NIL space, then we can explore that. And if you're somebody who just wants to support and doesn't have a need for a student athlete to provide you or your business with a service, then I think that nonprofit side makes a lot of sense. But either visit our website and donate if you're inclined to do so, or reach out to us and we'll be happy to have further discussions about how you may want to get involved.
I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but is there anything you feel like I'm missing, Curry? Anything else that you guys want to get out there as far as just a message to the fans and the people that could potentially get involved here?
I don't think so. I think you've done a great job. I mean, I think again, I'll hammer this home one more time. I think whether you're a fan of NIL or opposed to it or are generally indifferent about it, unfortunately, we have to support NIL because, like I said, it is the new facilities race that we've seen unfold over the last 2+ decades. And I will say this is a point that I meant to make earlier but didn't. K-State is uniquely positioned right now to really attack the NIL space, unlike somebody like KU who is undergoing massive, facility renovations, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Our facilities are in really good shape, and at least for the near future, there isn't a distinct need for any big renovations or any capital projects. And so the money and the focus that has been that has been put on facilities upgrades for the last 15+ years at Kansas State we no longer have to place that intense focus on facilities upgrades. And so fortunately, we do have the ability to shift that focus to something like NIL, which again, I think uniquely positions us to really be competitive in this space. And I know K-State fans are intelligent. They are incredibly committed. And so I know that it's just a matter of time before, we start to receive maybe the level of support that some of our competitors are receiving.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Curry, I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. As someone who does definitely understand that this is the currency in this day and age, is what you have to do. You guys are doing great work, and I certainly appreciate you getting out there and pounding the pavement here. So thanks for taking some time to join the podcast. Best of luck, and you let us know however we can help you in the future.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate the time today.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.